What Quirk? By Save the Spiral, in parentheses, Ellinor. Summary. Listen, Izuku didn't mean to have a pro-hero accidentally commit a felony when they were just trying to be a good homeroom teacher, and fill out Izuku's file. He never said he had a quirk. Apparently everyone else thought he did have one. Before I start, I do not own any rights to the My Hero Academia franchise, nor the music playing in the background of this video, and nor does the author of this fanfiction. So, Izuku hadn't planned on hiding his quirk status. It just never came up. No one actually asked, after all, just made assumptions. Did that count as a lie of omission? Izuku didn't want to lie to his classmates and teachers. He also didn't want to tell them either. It wasn't intentional, was all Izuku meant to say. He wouldn't intentionally commit a crime like quirk fraud. He hadn't technically. He was getting ahead of himself. There was a lot of lead up to him being in this situation. It started, arguably, there were a lot of moments that started the domino effect of not lies, but to make things simple, it started with his school application to UA. Legally, if there were no dietary accessibility or other accommodations needed for one's quirk, a student applying to general courses wouldn't need to disclose their quirk. A hero course or even a support technician course, yes. But that's because they are either expected to use their quirks or may have other circumstances that necessitate quirk usage and unique interactions when working in engineering, textiles, or even quirk analysis. A general student or one with other purely academic specialties like business would have no need to disclose a quirk if it does not require accommodations or allowances like necessary quirk discharge, verbal tics, or even physical tics. These things are necessary to know in a high-quality institution like UA, which prided itself on student and quirk equality. Meeting everyone's needs was impossible if the staff couldn't know what those needs were. So when Inko sent her son's incomplete application without a quirk listed, and not even the customary quirkless or NA, non-applicable, written on in the blank, it was processed as Izuku simply not disclosing his quirk, which was his legal right as a minor who had no medical or quirk-related needs. Typically, this was done by kids with embarrassingly weak quirks, and Izuku's application accidentally hit this loophole. That was what he was on the application, not a quirkless student, but one who didn't disclose their quirk, and it made all the difference in the world. Izuku was an anxious kid. He had been absolutely terrified when attending the entrance exam for UA, even when he was just attempting the general course exams, as opposed to the rumored, rigorous hero course exams. He had given up on his hero dream. It hadn't happened right away. It took more than his lifetime hero telling him to be realistic, though that had contributed greatly. It was the 10 months after that, the aftermath of what was now the sludge villain incident, where Izuku had tripped and fell when running to save Kacchan, spurring heroes on the scene to act as otherwise he would have been the next victim once Kacchan was finished suffocating. Izuku hadn't gotten close to even hoping Kacchan, regardless of how he had moved before he knew it, regardless of how much it looked like Kacchan had been asking for help. Izuku had run off after that, mortified and just glad to know that Kacchan was getting medical assistance. Kacchan had been too busy suffocating to even notice Izuku until later when he watched the replays of the news segment and recognized Izuku. So the heroes on the scene hadn't been told of Izuku's quirk status, instead thinking of him as some stupid, clumsy kid who ran off. All Might had not swooped in to save the day. He had watched the poor kid trip over himself, proven right that being quirkless would just get him hurt, and watched the heroes on duty handle the incident. He hadn't returned to his muscled form or needed to Detroit smash his way through anything. He would keep searching for a successor, unmoved by a clumsy kid with dreams that were too big for a weak, quirkless body. Izuku had run home, knees and palms scraped from falling. What little pride he had was shattered. When he got home, his mom held him as he cried himself to sleep. Aldera had been a worse tournament than Izuku ever thought possible. Him tripping and falling trying to save Kachan had been on national news. Everyone knew, at least at Aldera, 10 months of the resulting bullying was what little was left of Izuku's heroic drive. He had to be realistic. And so he applied only to the general course. The test had been a different day from the other courses, thankfully. Izuku needed to minimize all contact with Kachan, both of them mortified by the failed rescue and expressing it in different ways. Izuku ran away as he was prone to do, and Kachan was violent as he was prone to doing. That was simply how things were, and Izuku could only work to decrease all chances of interaction for his own health. There were a lot of students taking the general courses exam. Many of them were likely applying to other courses and using general course as a backup of sorts, but some were the same as Izuku, only looking to get the best education at an institution that opened up a lot of doors for its alumni, no matter what course its students graduated from. Simply having UA on his diploma would ensure so many people couldn't turn him away for his quirk status alone. Izuku didn't have any dreams anymore. He didn't know what exactly he wanted to do with his life. For so long, heroism had been his only option, yet now he was adrift, unsure. His mom was supportive, telling Izuku to keep as many options open as possible, that she would be cheering for him no matter what. She had said that there was more than one way to save people. Izuku didn't know about that, but he'd try his best to keep moving forward so she'd keep her smile, so she wouldn't worry about him. Izuku took the general education entrance exam and passed. In the envelope, he had been near the top of the academic rankings for the course. He was put into Class 1C, and he was officially a student of UA. It wasn't quite his dream, wasn't quite right, but Izuku knew he'd be spending the rest of his life studying for close enough, so he prepared for his new school life. It hadn't been of any note, so no teachers announced his enrollment, no principal congratulated him. Only Kachan got those. He got into the hero course, so he deserved it. Izuku spent a few weeks ignoring his classmates taunting him over not going to a hero school. They didn't know he'd be at UA, that he had done well, that he would have opportunities beyond what the Quirkless deserved in the modern day. In a way, the joke was on them, settling for mediocrity in half decent hero schools or general schools. Izuku never said those kind of mean thoughts aloud. He sure did think them, though. Leaving Aldera was a weight off Izuku's shoulders that he hadn't even realized was there. He didn't think about it too much, too excited to start at UA, once he had President Mike as a homeroom teacher. He was so cool and nice, and he didn't single Izuku out about anything at all, and allowed everyone to introduce themselves however they wanted. Several students didn't mention their quirks either, because it was obvious in the case of the girl with yarn for hair, or because they didn't want to, like the tired purple-haired boy. No one needed them for information or specifics, and so Izuku was able to avoid mentioning he was quirkless, so he could make actual friends for once. It was much, much harder than it had been when he was a toddler, which was when he had last attempted making friends. But he did his best, and everyone seemed really nice, excited to be at UA just like him. Lots of them were also fans of President Mike, so he got to talk heroes with them, No one else knew the more niche heroes, but it just meant Izuku could introduce some of his favorites that others didn't know yet. There were a few quieter and standoffish students in the class, a few of them definitely having failed the heroics exam. Izuku didn't think about them, if only because of the little pit in his stomach that roiled away with anxiety, telling him that would have been him if he had tried the heroics exam. He ignored it and went back to talking about his favorite segments from Put Your Hands Up. Things were simultaneously normal and completely extraordinary. Ectoplasm taught math. Cementos was teaching literature. Everywhere Izuku looked, he saw a hero. It was amazing. He got autographs from all of them, either after his first class with them or upon meeting them in the hallway, when they didn't look busy, like Snipe, who only taught classes to the hero course aside from the extracurricular weaponry club for Gen Ed. Their signatures filled the gaps of Izuku's notes, beside his mediocre sketches and analysis. He couldn't be more grateful, even when the pros tried to be nice and compliment his notes as if they were anything more than a fanboy's rambling. He was adjusting well to UA. Granted, he kept some habits from Eldora, but none of his new classmates thought he was weird enough to point it out, so he must have been doing a great job pretending to be a normal teenager. The only thing some of his peers had teased him about was being a hero fanboy, and when Izuku had almost cried over it, they reassured him that they were joking and thought it was impressive about how dedicated he was. So Izuku was doing pretty good. Even when an alarm went off during lunch one day, Izuku hadn't freaked out, instead hiding behind one of his larger classmates who had basically scruffed him like a cat to keep him near. Said classmate kept him from being crushed too badly in the stampede of the hallways, though he had some bruises from it all that recovery girl used her quirk on, so Izuku got to meet her and get her autograph. When they got back to class, some of his classmates talked about how teaching him to have priorities and self-preservation. He internally swore to not tell them about the hero chasing in order to see pros in action. Apparently, the alarm had been from reporters trespassing onto campus, wanting a story from All Might, who would be teaching the hero course. President Mike Sensei still wasn't in class because of this, off to corral the media. Instead, they were dismissed by a mildly agitated hound dog, who seemed to calm down when Izuku asked for an autograph, if only because his growling and barking kept startling Izuku into dropping his notebook and pen. Hound Dog's jagged, rough signature underlining Izuku's sketch of the hero was something he cherished at least. Hound Dog... I already read that. By the end of the week, Izuku had settled somewhat into a routine. He didn't get so excited or anxious anymore around the pro heroes, able to now focus on their lessons as opposed to the impulse to ramble and mutter about their statistics and notable achievements in the hero industry. He had befriended most of his classmates to the best of his abilities, their newly voted class representative setting up a group chat that was far too crowded and terrifying for Izuku's taste. Thankfully, they were subgroup chats, one of which was deemed Izuku's info dump zone, where he could ramble about heroes and quirks to his heart's content. He spent a lot of time there, and it was a majority of his socialization. In the main group chat, a lot of them came to the conclusion that Izuku had an analysis quirk of some kind, when Izuku never checked the main chat to deny this, having muted it due to the deluge of notifications giving him heart palpitations. They assumed they were correct. The only snag at the end of the week was during their English class with the homeroom teacher. Some sort of alarm rang, and a Principal Netsu's voice declared an emergency with all hands on deck from available. I'm getting heartburn. Available pro heroes on staff. President Mike Sensei left the room in a sprint, shouting that their class representative was in charge. He had accidentally used voice and cracked some of the windows, as well as overwhelming the few heteromorphic students who had advanced hearing while doing so. 1C was in a class rep enforced study hall after that, with Izuku and a few others who were more fluent in English helping others with the assignments. They were all dismissed early when a distraught and dirty Present Mic Sensei returned to their class, waving them all out and claiming that the incident wasn't a big deal and that they should head home for the day. Izuku found himself uninterested in the events at the USJ facility, as he couldn't get more information aside from his mom calling Auntie Mitsuki to check on Ketchon, who was apparently okay and had kicked some villain thugs' butts. He instead threw himself into analysis for the upcoming sports festival. He was an avid watcher with notes going back to when he was old enough to understand it was hero stuff, which was enough for him at age 5 to be a fan. He rewatched a lot of past sports festivals, falling behind on current hero events, but he could always catch up on those later. There were multiple YouTube channels that only did recaps for the popular heroes had been up to, with highlights of battles, merchandise releases, and interviews. Izuku had lost sleep over his analysis, and so when school resumed on Monday, he had to explain away the bags under his eyes. A few of his classmates who indulged his fanboy rantings had asked to see his notes, which he denied shakily, and thankfully they backed off before Izuku could be embarrassed by his own amateur analysis. Where am I? Only halfway, really? Everyone in class had heard, though, and some sent him looks when he said he wouldn't be competing seriously in the sports festival, as if he wouldn't get demolished. Izuku would rather not have his mom watch him get beat up on international television. When they had been dismissed for lunch, President Mike Sensei called Izuku to his office to talk about the sports festival. It had mostly been President Mike Sensei confirming that Izuku didn't want to compete, but would be technically participating because he was analyzing the event. Izuku was a bit bashful about it, only because his note-taking couldn't be on par with, say, the business course students. Actually, doing something that had to do with their future careers was grateful, and President Mike Sensei allowed him to avoid the festival, though he assumed it was because President Mike Sensei knew that Izuku wouldn't do well as a quirkless kid against his quirked peers, especially those in the hero course. So, I have a question. Is it fanon or canon that the business course will, make betting pools for who will win the sports festival each year? Is that a real thing, or is it just a head canon that I accidentally came up with? Because it seems totally plausible, and Nezu would totally allow that for some reason, but he'd make sure everyone was hush-hush about it, right? Anyways, in the days following up, Izuku spent most of his free time between classes and during lunch working on cleaning up his notebook, as well as looking over things and coming up with ideas when he could see it all laid out in front of him. Most of his classmates left him to it, resigned to losing him to his fanboy tendencies until the sports festival ended. One classmate didn't leave Izuku alone, though. "What are you doing?" Shinso Hitoshi asked Izuku, standing next to Izuku's desk, as he continued working on their empty homeroom, only pausing to pick at his bento. "What? Shinso-san." Izuku startled, having assumed that everyone left the classroom for lunch, as had happened for the past week. "Midoriya-san," Shinso said, voice dry and unimpressed. Izuku brushed the rice off his chart of point values. Hi, Shinso-san." "What was your question?" He expected to be asked about the past sports festivals or a current hero event, maybe. "Why are you working so hard if you're not even competing in this festival? Everyone knows you're the most knowledgeable about heroes and quirks, so why are you staying here?" Shinso gestured to the 1C classroom with frustration. Shinso-san, I'm not competing because..." Izuku trailed off, looking down at his notebook. Why wasn't he competing? If you mean competing to try to transfer to the hero course, I can't do that. He has to be realistic. There are more ways to save people than heroism, allegedly. You can definitely do that. Students have in the past. Are you just throwing away all this hard work for what? A notebook you won't show anyone? Shinso was accusatory, indignant, on Izuku's behalf for some reason. Izuku shook his head, arranging his pencils on the desk, and flipping a page in his notebook. I can't be a hero, Shinso-san. Izuku tried to stay strong, but his voice cracked and tears welled up and threatened to spill over. Izuku looked up, and the expression Shinso had was some awful mix of pity and frustration. Izuku tried to fix the social situation he had definitely botched. If you want to see my notes when they're done, they're not that good. It's all amateur, really. But, you could look if you think these notes could help you transfer to the hero course, but, don't rely on them. I mean, it's really Midoriya-san. Hitoshi interrupted Izuku's downward spiral of nervous words. Shinso-san? Shut up. Okay. It ended up with another subgroup chat, that this one called Sports Festival Tryhards, and Midoriya, where Izuku was going to send his compiled analysis for those trying to enter the hero course. Only 5 students of 1C's 20 were seriously trying to transfer to the hero course, and Shinso was the most adamant and determined. He was also one of the few in class who never mentioned his quirk. Not that Izuku had any room to talk about that. Izuku spent more time than ever working on his analysis, now spurred on by a concrete goal. It was more substantial even than his vague dreams of heroics in the future, though that was long dead. This was something he could do, providing information to give his classmates the best chance of doing well in the sports festival, well enough to be noticed or reconsidered. Izuku couldn't custom tailor 5 plans for 5 different people with different quirks, but he could do his best. That's all they asked of him, according to 1C's class representative, who had directed messages Izuku to send their appreciation over his assistance to their hero hopefuls, as well as soothing some of Izuku's anxieties over the entire affair. No one would be mad at Izuku long as he did his best, and he was good at doing his best. It was just that his best wasn't good enough most times. This time it had to be. The sports festival itself had been amazing to watch. Izuku had set himself up for a little safe area in 1C's box, complete with extra notebooks, pencils, a portable charger for his phone, and plenty of snacks and drinks for the event. His notes had actually helped. 3 of his classmates were led by Shinso to make it on the top, 42 to finish the first round. The obstacle course, one of his classmates who had been trying was unfortunately placed 43rd after they collided with an overeager support student on the minefield. Another placed 47th, and the rest weren't truly competitive. After the first round, most of Izuku's classmates joined him in their box to cheer on their classmates. Some of them congratulated Izuku with his notes helping. And even one of his classmates who hadn't made it to the second round had no hard feelings, as she admitted it was her own clumsiness at fault. The other was upset but being comforted by friends and didn't seem angry at Izuku, more angry at himself. For the second round, all of the remaining 1C students worked together just as Izuku's notes had advised. He hadn't insisted they do so, not willing to tell anyone what to do, but he had said that relying on each other in team events with their pre-existing knowledge pre-existing knowledge of each other and their quirks would work, and it did. Shinso was a rider most of his weight on a Goea Yamato as the lightest and least physically fit of the group. And Izuku had been terrified to point that out, but Shinso was well aware and took Izuku's words well. And the other three worked as horses, trying to target 1A as 1B was too coordinated. 1A only had 18 students, 2 being withdrawn from UA after the USJ, and their team creation left a lot to be desired. Izuku found his gaze drifting to Kacchan, who was atop his own horses in the battle, with the 10 million point headband, sharp teeth bared to the cameras and opposing teams alike. It was a self-satisfied smile that Izuku knew meant Kacchan's win was an inevitability. He really hoped that Shinso took his advice. Izuku had specifically put a picture of Kacchan in his notes, saying to avoid him at all costs in combat situations, as any of the 1C hopefuls were hopelessly outclassed, both in quirk and skill, frankly. Granted, Izuku still didn't know what Shinso's quirk was, but whatever it was couldn't compare to explosion in raw power and versatility. Very few quirks could, at least at the level of training a 15-year-old could feasibly be at. Son of Endeavor, who was in 1A, definitely could, but so far no one else had shown that. Time would tell. They'd all be great heroes, but Kacchan was going to be number 1. Izuku watched the second round really get underway, a 1B team targeting 1C's team likely easy points. They were rebuffed, and 1C made their escape, going towards a 1A team that hadn't gone for the 10 million points like the rest. This was nearly the most stressful 15 minutes of Izuku's life. The only thing that suppressed this was the sludge villain incident. Izuku's hands were already cramped from writing so much, and he spent some of his time paying rapt attention to trying to commit everything to memory as he massaged the cramp away in his hand, fingers digging into the ball of his thumb as tension rose. Why didn't he bring his laptop? You know that bitch has a laptop. 1C was cheering wildly in their box as the cavalry team snagged more points, taking advantage of the team stuck in the floor from being some sort of object liquefaction or softening quirk. They had 3 bands now, including their own initial points. It was just enough to scrape by. Their pair of horses, Agiyamato and Togeki, were trapped in the last-ditch wave of ice across the arena. But the timer ran out before any of the still mobile teams could steal their points. 1C was cheering, some of their students stomping their feet. Their class rep's voice already gone hoarse, proud tears in their eyes. Izuku was crying as well, pride in his classmates so overwhelming that he did it. With his help, they'd be in the 3rd round, and everyone would have to see them now. It was amazing to see. 2 1A teams, the ones led by Kacchan and Todoroki, as well as 1B were also in the tournament. There are 3 1C students were part of the 16-person bracket, which was announced right before lunch. Another 1A student was bumped up into the 3rd round, her team placing 5th, and them not nominating her to move forward. I bet it was Uraraka. Izuku spent... Fuck my eye. Izuku spent his time writing down the bracket, trying to puzzle out what exactly some of the quirks he had seen were. He couldn't determine what exactly Awase Yoetsu's quirk actually did. He couldn't recall it being used. Maybe there was no visual indicator, or it was mental. From Shinso's grumbling over the past week, Izuku had thought the entrance exam was biased towards physical quirks. Maybe Awase was a recommendation student. Present Mike Sensei would announce it all when the tournament was underway, thankfully. Most of 1C's seating box was cleared out for lunch and the substitute... Fucking hell. Most of 1C's seating box was cleared out for lunch and the subsequent recreational games, which Izuku was ignoring in favor of diving into his analysis. He wouldn't be able to really help his fellow 1C students unless they were up against Kachan, as all notes on other hero students were purely conjecture based on what Izuku saw, but it wasn't a fun exercise. When watching at home, there were graphics that overlaid these kinds of things to give away quirks before Izuku had the chance to really guess like this. Midoriya-san. Izuku jumped, accidentally scoring a line across his notes. In a dark line of graphite, he whipped his head around to see an awkwardly shifting Shinso who looked away from him. Shinso-san? Izuku said, swallowing nervously. It wasn't that he was intimidated by his classmate, at least not any more intimidated than he was by anyone else, which was always at least a small chance of being a threat to Izuku's anxious mind, but not Shinso in particular. I can tell you're overthinking already, Shinso said, and then sighed. As he sat in the seat down the row from Izuku, not close enough to read Izuku's notebook. I wanted to thank you, he said in a stilted mumble. I didn't do anything. It was you and your classmates that actually made it through the sports festival. Izuku brought his hands up as if in surrender, shaking them around as if to say it wasn't a big deal. We wouldn't have worked together without your notes, Midoriya-san, Shinso said, it as if that was obvious. It was not obvious. No, Izuku almost began another spiraling rant of denial, but Shinso cut it off early. Midoriya-san, you didn't have to share your analysis. I probably shouldn't have, guilted you into doing it. That was a dick move on my part, but I'm really, really grateful that you did, because of you, we all have a chance at being a hero, which is more than we had before. And I know you said you couldn't be a hero, but I've said the same thing before about myself, and just look at me now. About to go into the third round of UA Sports Festival. This is just to say, I think you could be a hero too, Midoriya-kun. You already were my hero, and two of our classmates' heroes as well. You gave us all a chance at our dreams, and that's more than anyone else has done for us before. That's, pretty damn heroic. I'm going to go now. Thank you, Midoriya-kun. Izuku was in shock, jaw dropped, eyes wide, heart skipping. He couldn't believe it. He literally could not allow himself to believe the words being said to him. He couldn't get his hopes up like that, not again. But Izuku's heart raced, his hands trembling, a dream rekindled with hope and finally proof that he could help people, maybe even save people. What happened to being realistic? Shinso left to get lunch, head ducked and faced red. Is this never mind. Izuku was almost in a trance, grip loose on the notebook and pencil barely able to pay any attention at all to the recreational games. Shinso left partway through the recreational games. His match, the first in the bracket against 1B's Awase? I don't know how I said it before. It was a quick match, and Izuku was only disappointed that he had to learn Awase's quirk through President Mike's sensei's commentary rather than figuring out what actually was a physical quirk. Just one that had little opportunity for use against in one-on-one against Shinso's quirk, which President Mike Sensei still hadn't explained, and Izuku was very interested in finding out. Shinso didn't return to the box for Izuku to find a way to ask him politely. The next round was nearly instant. Todoroki defeated a kid with a tape quirk, with a frankly ridiculous glacier. Izuku had never seen an ice quirk used on such a scale aside from the Brazilian villain, who was more focused on outdoing the pro heroes she saw as her rival, and so froze 10 hectares of uninhabited land near Sao Paulo. Almost all of 1C were shivering in their PE uniforms, aside from the classmate with a yak quirk, of course. Thankfully, Todoroki had melted his glacier, and after nearly 20 minutes, the next match began. 1C's Agi Yamato Susuaka against 1A's Ida Tenya, apparently the younger brother of the turbo hero Ingenium. Knowing Agi Yamato's quirk meant that Izuku's predictions were not in his class's favor. Laughing gas against a version of Engine, a familial quirk with a legacy of heroes to learn techniques from. It wasn't looking good. Even Agi Yamato's bulk wasn't trained in any combat like Ida's definitely would be. It was a quick match, but thankfully not as fast as the previous one. 1C cheered the best they could as the match began, and Agi Yamato opened his mutated jaw, colorful gas releasing in a cloud swirling forward. Ida was too fast, and while he might not make precise turns, he could instead kick the air with engine active, the resulting gust of air blowing all of the laughing gases cloud out of the ring. Ida then kicked Agi Yamato in the chest, winding him and stopping the production of laughing gas as he focused on breathing. Izuku winced as 1C tried to support Agi Yamato, telling him to get up, but Ida had hauled their classmate over his shoulder, kicking Engine into gear, and then stopping neatly near the ring's boundary, launching Agi Yamato out. 1C groaned but shouted encouragement as President Mike Sensei congratulated Ida on his win. The next match was 1A's electric quirk user Kaminari against 1B's Shiozaki, who had obviously quirked hair that manifested as thorny vines. Izuku rapidly flipped pages over to the right part of his notebook, noting the students' names and taking notes. Shiozaki won handily, And Izuku had a whole bunch of theories as to why Kaminari had shorted out, but he had to put those aside to focus on the last match of the tournament's first round to have a 1C. Togeki's Frost Breath wasn't likely to be effective against 1C's Ashido, who had definitely encountered Todoroki's more potent ice, in fact, in training over the past month of schooling. Izuku shouted alongside his classmates to encourage T. I'm going with T. To do her best, and she waved up to their box. The close-up on the massive screen above the stands revealing how queasy her expression had become. Ashido danced around T, who wasn't able to keep up, and Frost Breath wasn't strong enough to freeze Ashido's acid. But Izuku had cheered on T when she had been forced out of the ring to dodge another volley of acid. Next was 1A against itself. The Uraraka girl with a gravity quirk based on Mike Sensei's vamping, and the strange Matrix manifestation quirk from Yaoyorozu, who Izuku had yet to establish a limit on the usage of her quirk. Yaoyorozu won by creating a net gun out of her torso, and President Mike Sensei's description of creation had made Izuku want to run and find Yaoyorozu for a quirk-based interrogation, but he held himself back. Next came the strangely familiar Tetsu of 1B and Kirishima of 1A. Izuku spent most of the match comparing their differences, but he'd definitely need to look into the record footage to see the close-up differences to how their shielding quirks manifested themselves. They knocked each other out with a tiebreaker to be announced upon the regained consciousness. Next Kachan and a 1B kid, Hananikyu. Kachan won against 1, making it look easy. Izuku didn't have anything new to note on Explosion. It was a versatile and powerful quirk as ever. Kirishima and Tetsu then had a tense match of rock, paper, scissors, Kirishima winning. That's different from the anime. Shinso faced Todoroki in the next round, and he appeared to be goading or taunting Todoroki even before the match started. The arena went silent when the match didn't start with another glacier. Instead, Todoroki simply turned around and left the ring. Walking toward the tunnel he came from with a blanking expression, somehow blinker than his usual face. After a beat, 1C broke into screaming cheers, breaking the silence. Shinso won. Izuku noted all of the possibilities of Shinso's quirk and marveled at the fact that Shinso had ever thought he couldn't be a hero. Ida and Shiozaki faced off, Ida winning after a struggle of pure bodily strength. Next came Ashido versus Yaoyorozu, which had taken longer, though that was mostly due to Yaoyorozu finding a pattern in Ashido's elaborate dance movements as she skated with acid. Kirishima battled Kachan, but it wasn't a real fight. While Kirishima could withstand Explosion, hardening couldn't last forever, and was eventually knocked out. The semifinals began with Shinso against Ida. Once he was already hoarse from cheering, but Izuku stood from his seat and leaned over the edge of their box, calling down to Shinso, telling him to do his best. Shinso seemed to hear him, or maybe that he was just seeing what he wanted to. Shinso provoked Ida in some way, and after a moment, Ida stopped in his tracks, cutting off engine from where it had been revving up, and instead walked out of the ring. Izuku could feel his throat begin to hurt from cheering and screaming, but he never had a reason to be this excited since he had met All Might in person. Yaoyorozu and Kachan fought, but Kachan was more skilled in quick thinking in combat, taking out Yaoyorozu quickly but efficiently. Some people in the crowd yelling that he should have been easier on the girl, but Eraserhead's 1A's homeroom's teacher and the second commentator shut them down decisively. The final match of Shinso and Kachan was likely to be anticlimactic. Kachan was definitely caught on to at least some aspect of interaction, activating whatever Shinso's quirk was, and wouldn't fall that easily to taunts despite how quick to anger he was. If he was focused on the battle itself instead of Shinso's mind games, it was already won. There was a reason Izuku had noted to avoid Kachan at all costs. Shinso appeared to rely fully on his quirk instead of any combat skills. Izuku almost wanted to cover his eyes to avoid seeing the inevitable landslide victory, but kept watching. He wanted to support Kachan and Shinso both by watching them. It took less than a minute for Kachan to clock Shinso with that opening right hook to the face, catching him across the cheekbone and likely shattering it with the force of explosion behind it. Shinso hit the ground and was out cold. No one in 1C cheered. Izuku felt guilty for wanting to cheer for Kachan sitting quietly in his seat, with a little knot of anxiety and nausea twisting in his gut. At the awards ceremony, 1C supported Shinso, who had a riot of dark purple bruising across the right half of his face. As he stood on the second-place pedestal, looking dumbstruck as All Might placed the medal around his neck, he had already left for a family emergency, so just a dark scowling Kachan was on top of the podium, and a very uncomfortable-looking Yahirozu on the third-place podium, accompanied by Shinso. Others in 1C also thanked and congratulated Izuku despite how little he had really helped. It still felt good, and Izuku selfishly accepted the praise despite being undeserving. After the sports festival, of which Izuku took extensive notes on, the second and third year festivals from the next 2 days, Izuku spent most of his free time catching up with current hero events. He almost missed a merchandise drop from the Wild Wild Pussycats. The banner of the Rescue Hero group in their signature pose took a place of pride in Izuku's walls, despite it requiring him to take down some All Might posters. He carefully preserved these parts of his collection, but was still content with storing them inside a display instead of displaying them. All Might wasn't really his favorite hero anymore. It was corny, but he couldn't wait to see what kind of hero Shinso became. He couldn't wait to become his classmates', hopefully ex-classmates' #1 fan. Shinso was still in 1C when school returned. To everyone's confused disappointment, they all congratulated him again, and he explained that he would be transferring after joining in on the hero course's final exams and training camp, and would have after-school training to catch up. Apparently, Aga Yamato and Dogeki were both joining him in after-school training and would be competing for the last remaining spot in 1A. They treated it like a friendly rivalry, as apparently both of them could join, but it wouldn't be likely. They focused on improving together instead of competing, which Izuku thought was admirable. Izuku was busy with more schoolwork and other fanboy business, returning to his forums and spending a lot of time cleaning up his notes from all 3 sports festivals, finally rewatching them with his mom indulgently by his side. Weeks passed. Izuku remained near the top of his class in academia, and kept himself aside from the occasional near-daily, nonsensical quirk and hero analysis in his own little group chat. Shinso had joined said group chat and occasionally reacted to his post with some thumbs-up emoji or even question marks to encourage Izuku to explain further. Shinso was too busy with hero course training to really talk, unfortunately. Internships for hero students came and went, and Izuku barely noticed, besides the school being quieter than normal. He worked hard, and soon enough the final exams for the semester were upon them. Izuku ended up studying with some classmates sometimes, staying late at UA's library and sending his notes and study guides to a few people to share around to try to help. No one really focused on helping him back, and he was stressed and lost some sleep over worrying about being kicked out of UA if he failed, and it was fine. He actually did pretty good on the exams. To celebrate, Izuku's mom took him to a new merch store he hadn't visited yet, in the massive Kiyashi Mall. He brought his backpack emptied of everything but his current analysis notebook, just to carry more merch. He hoped to find a lot, maybe some pins for his bag. He could give some of those to his classmates as he kept notes on who liked which hero. That brought him to right now, where he realized that no one at UA seemed to realize he was quirkless. What analysis quirk? Izuku asked, still slightly numb from the roller coaster of adrenaline he had experienced upon seeing Shinso with the stranger's hand around his neck. His mom had helped him, interceding and acting casual, even asking if the teenager was another one of Izuku's classmates, forcing the man to leave, though not before he threatened Shinso. Izuku and his mom promptly collapsed against each other, having a joint panic attack over the event. Once 1A, most of them at least, as Kachan and Todoroki weren't there, returned to where they had lost Shinso on the shopping trip and explained just how lethal Shigaraki in his hand was. Your analysis quirk, Eraser had said slowly, as if Izuku was stupid. Izuku's mom didn't appreciate this and glared at Eraserhead despite him being one of Izuku's most ranted about underground heroes. I don't have a quirk, Izuku said plainly. The police were still around, as well as some local heroes who were securing the mall when I was still around, and as was Shinso. Your file at UA says you have a quirk, Eraserhead said, with a slight accusatory tone. My son doesn't make the files at UA. He didn't claim to have a quirk on any of his paperwork. Eraserhead dragged a hand over his face. He grumbled under his breath before returning to the conversation. So, aside from UA believing your son has an analysis quirk and having adapted his curriculum to be more advanced because of this, and your statements already being taken, is there anything else you want to go over? No, sir, Izuku said. He glanced to 1A, most of whom were looking at him in shock, apparently all knowing of him. Shinso was also staring at Izuku with disbelief, an expression so starkly different from his usual stoicism or resting bitch face. It was nice to meet you all, but Izuku and I will be going home now. Good luck with your training camp. Izuku's mom bowed quickly and ushered Izuku out of the now cordoned off mall. As they left, his mom hugged him tight to her side. She sniffled quietly. My genius son accidentally committing quirk fraud, she said in a teasingly fake pride in her voice. Mom, Izuku squawked. That's the end of this fanfiction. I hope y'all have a wonderful day. Thank you for listening. If you want to read this on your own, I suggest that. I read somewhere in these tags that it says sexually ambiguous Izuku Midoriya, and I'm trying to find it. I'm not sure where I read that. I love Unreliable. Every time I see autistic, I usually read it as acoustic. Hilarious, I swear. Have a wonderful day, I guess. I don't know, man. I'm so tired. I've been reading this for about an hour. Why does it take me an hour to read 6,878 words? Come on, let's look that up. Word to speech converter. No, not that. I want to know the general. Okay. Did I say 6,828? Oh, so I'm just on time. I think. Let me double check. Oh, 878. Okay, let me go back to that. Nope. Speech to what? Word to speech. No, not. I don't want Speechify. Word count to speech time. So it was 6,878. I was trying so hard to win. I failed. I guess I'm a slow reader. They're so mean to me. Have a wonderful evening, y'all.